Silence didn't arrive in the Alpha Hall. It conquered. It pressed down from the vaulted ceiling, thick and deliberate, swallowing every breath. The stone walls seemed to lean inward, as if the room itself wanted to witness what came next. Karen Vox stood at the center of it all alone. She was Luna in name only now. The ceremonial silver she'd worn for 3 years had been removed that morning. No guards flanked her. No allies met her eyes. Just cold marble beneath her feet and the weight of 100 stairs pressing into her back. She kept her breathing steady, controlled. It was the only thing left she could control. The air tasted metallic, like fear, like finality. 3 years. 3 years of waiting, of hoping, of enduring whispered doubts in hallways and pitying glances from wolves who once bowed to her. 3 years of waking beside an alpha who grew colder with each passing moon, his touch becoming duty, then distance, then nothing at all. She had not failed overnight. She had bled hope slowly, month after month, until there was nothing left but the truth everyone already knew. She was barren. And in a world where bloodlines were power, that made her worthless. Kenneth Lugo sat elevated on the Alpha's throne, his expression carved from stone. He didn't look at her, not directly. His gaze stayed fixed somewhere beyond her shoulder, as though she were already gone. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about his authority, his future, the pack's stability. She understood that now. The elders lined the walls, still as sentinels. William's Bob stood nearest the throne, his face carefully neutral, though she'd heard him argue for this outcome weeks ago. Cynthia Clot lingered, near the far column, her mouth curved in something too soft to be called a smile. Time stretched. Karen felt her heartbeat in her throat, steady and defiant, even as her hands trembled at her sides. She knew what was coming. She'd known since the moment the summons arrived. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. Kenneth Lugo leaned forward, and the hall held its breath. If you're hooked, subscribe now, because what happens next will shatter everything you think you know. Like, and share if you want to see Karen Vox rise from the ashes. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. Karen Vox. His voice was formal, distant, as if she were a stranger. You have served this pack with loyalty. That will not be forgotten. A pause. Calculated. Pull. But loyalty is not enough. She didn't flinch. She refused to give him that. The role of Luna requires more than devotion. It requires legacy, continuity, strength that can be passed down. William's Bob nodded solemnly. Others followed. Kenneth's eyes finally met hers. You have been unable to provide that. The words landed like blows, each one precise. For the good of the pack and the future of this territory, I am severing our bond. Effective immediately, you are no longer Luna. You are no longer my mate. The hall erupted in murmurs, some shocked, most satisfied. Karen stood frozen, her world collapsing inward. She had prepared for this. She had rehearsed her composure. But nothing could prepare her for the emptiness in his eyes. You will leave these lands by dawn, Kenneth continued. You may take what is yours. Nothing more. Cynthia stepped forward then, her timing perfect. Alpha, she said softly, her voice dripping false sympathy. Shall I escort her to her chambers? To help her transition? Kenneth waved a hand. Do what you see fit. Karen's breath caught. She wanted to scream, to rage, to demand he look at her, really look at her, and see the woman who had stood beside him through war, through doubt, through every trial this pack had faced. But she didn't, because she understood now. He had already decided she didn't matter. The crowd parted as she turned. No one touched her. No one spoke. She walked through the hall alone, her spine straight, her head high, even as her heart shattered with every step. Behind her, Kenneth Lugo returned to his throne. The pack moved on, and Karen Vox disappeared into exile. But they didn't know. None of them knew what she carried with her into the wilderness. None of them knew what she would become. And none of them, not Kenneth, not Williams, not Cynthia, could imagine what would walk back through those gates 3 years later. Chapter 2: The Exile. The wilderness didn't welcome her. It simply allowed her to exist. Karen stumbled through the dense forest, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her feet bleeding through thin ceremonial slippers never meant for this terrain. The pack lands ended miles back, marked by ancient stones that hummed with territorial magic. She'd felt the severing like a physical cut when she crossed that boundary. No longer pack, no longer protected, just alone. The moon hung fat and silver above the canopy, indifferent to her suffering. She'd always found comfort in moonlight before, felt connected to something greater, something eternal. Now it only illuminated how far she'd fallen. One foot forward, then another. That was all she could manage. The forest pressed close around her, branches catching at her torn dress, roots threatening to trip her with every step. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stop. If she stopped, she would collapse. If she collapsed, she might never rise again. Somewhere behind her, hours, days, lay everything she'd known. Her chambers, with their silk curtains. The gardens where she'd walked each morning. The war room where she'd stood beside Kenneth, advising, strategizing, believing she mattered, believing he loved her, asterisk. Karen's chest tightened. She forced the thought down, buried it deep. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not yet. Not when survival still hung in the balance. A stream appeared through the trees, its water dark and swift. She fell to her knees beside it, cupping her hands, drinking desperately. The cold shocked her system, sharp and clarifying. She caught her reflection in the water's surface. Hollow eyes stared back. Tangled hair. Bruises blooming across her collarbone where she'd collided with a low branch. She looked nothing like the Luna who'd stood in that hall mere hours ago. She looked broken. Good. Something whispered inside her. Let them think you're broken. Karen blinked. The thought hadn't felt entirely like her own. She pressed her palm against her lower abdomen, a gesture that had become habit over 3 years of disappointment. Empty, the healers had declared. Barren, the elders had whispered. Useless, Kenneth's silence had confirmed. But now something felt different. A warmth. A presence. So faint she might have imagined it. Karen's breath caught. She closed her eyes, focusing inward with the same intuition that had once helped her sense threats to the pack, predict challenger movements, know when Kenneth was troubled before he spoke. There. Not emptiness. Not anymore. 2 tiny sparks of life, nestled deep, fragile.
Impossible. Real.
No, she whispered to the uncaring forest. No, it's not possible. But even as denial left her lips, certainty bloomed in her chest. She knew her own body. She knew what she felt.
Pregnant.
After 3 years of barrenness, of failure, of shame, pregnant. The timing made it crueler. If she'd known yesterday, she could have what? Told Kenneth? Would he have believed her? Or would he have accused her of lying, of desperation, of trying to manipulate her way back into his bed? She could return, race back to the border, demand to be heard, prove. Karen stopped that thought cold. Return to what? To a mate who'd severed their bond without hesitation? To a pack that had watched her humiliation in silence? To a court that included Cynthia Clot, already circling Kenneth like a vulture?
No.
Whatever grew inside her now belonged to the wilderness, not to the pack that had cast her out. She would survive. She would endure. And she would never give them the satisfaction of seeing her beg. Karen pushed herself upright, legs shaking. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, dark and unknowable.
No shelter. No allies.
No plan beyond the next step. But she had something Kenneth Lugo had never truly possessed. She had her word, her will. And now, impossible as it seemed, she had hope. The Luna they'd rejected was gone. What emerged from this wilderness would be something else entirely. Karen Vox took one step forward into the unknown darkness. Then another. And another. Behind her, the stream continued its indifferent flow, erasing her reflection, leaving no trace she'd ever been there at all. But deep in the shadows where moonlight couldn't reach, something ancient stirred. Something that had waited centuries for a bloodline strong enough to wake it. Something that recognized her scent and claimed her as its own. Chapter 3. The Being. Karen woke to eyes that didn't blink. She jerked upright, heart hammering, instinct screaming predator. But her body wouldn't obey. Exhaustion had turned her limbs to stone. She'd collapsed beneath a hollow oak sometime after midnight, too depleted to continue, too numb to care if she survived the night. Apparently, something had cared. The creature sat 3 feet away, perfectly still. Not wolf. Not human. Something else. Its form seemed to shift in the pre-dawn darkness, solid one moment, shadow the next. Massive shoulders. Hands that could have been claws. A face obscured by angles that didn't quite make sense, as though reality bent slightly around it. But the eyes. The eyes were clear, ancient, and fixed entirely on her. Karen's breath came shallow and quick. Every instinct told her to run. But something deeper, something that had nothing to do with logic, kept her frozen. It's not here to hurt you, that same unfamiliar voice whispered inside her mind. What are you? She managed, her voice cracked and raw. The being didn't answer, didn't move, just watched with an intensity that felt like being studied by the moon itself. Slowly, carefully, Karen pushed herself back against the tree trunk. Her hand instinctively moved to her abdomen. Protective, defensive. The being's gaze followed the gesture. Then it tilted its head, and she could have sworn something like recognition flickered across those incomprehensible features. You can see them, Karen whispered. Not a question. A certainty. The being's form solidified slightly, became more defined. In the growing light, she could make out details. Bark dark skin marked with symbols that might have been scars or something older. Hair, if it was hair, that moved like smoke. A presence so heavy it pressed against her chest. But no threat.
No aggression.
Only waiting. Why are you here?
Karen asked.
The being's mouth didn't move, but a voice filled her head. Not words exactly, but meaning that bypassed language entirely.
Bound. Called. Owed.
Karen's pulse quickened. I didn't call you. I don't even know what you are. Blood calls. Line calls. Debt calls. I don't understand. You carry what was lost. I protect what is owed. The twins. It was talking about the twins. Karen's hand pressed harder against her stomach. They're mine. Not yours. Not anyone's. For the first time, the being moved. It lowered its head. Not submission, but acknowledgement. Yours. Always yours. I serve the line. I am bound to protect. Bound by whom? The first. The mother. The one who gave blood for power. Karen's mind raced. Pack history spoke of ancient contracts, of deals made in desperate times. But those were stories told to children, warnings against bargaining with forces beyond understanding. This thing wasn't a story. It was real. Solid. Here. How long have you been following me? Since the boundary. Since the severing. Since you became unprotected. Since she'd crossed out of Pack lands. Since the bond with Kenneth had shattered. Since she'd become vulnerable. And you'll protect me? Protect them? The being's eyes seemed to glow slightly in the gathering dawn. Until death. Until debt is paid. Until the line ends or releases me. Karen wanted to question further, to demand explanations, to understand the rules of whatever bargain her bloodline had made generations ago. But exhaustion pulled at her, and something in the being's absolute stillness suggested it had said all it intended to say. Do you have a name? She asked quietly. A pause. Then, Daniel Woods.
Once.
Long ago. Karen studied the creature. The being, Daniel Woods. Tried to imagine him as something human, something that had once walked among mortals with a name and a life.
Failed.
Will you hurt me? She asked, too tired for anything but bluntness. Never. Will you obey me? Only you. The line commands. You are the line. Something loosened in Karen's chest. Not trust, not yet. But something close. The first thread of security she'd felt since the judgment hall. Then stay close, she whispered. They're fragile.
I'm fragile.
And I don't know how to survive this alone. Daniel Woods settled back into the shadows, his form blending with the darkness beneath the trees. You are not alone. Not anymore. Karen closed her eyes, letting exhaustion finally claim her. For the first time since Exile, she slept without fear. And in the darkness, something ancient kept watch. 3 years would pass in that wilderness. 3 years of survival, of transformation, of becoming something the pack could never have imagined. But that story belonged to the silence between chapters, to the months of hunger and growth, of pain and power learned in solitude. The pack would only see the result. And by then, it would be far too late. Chapter 4. The Return. 3 years changed everything. The gates of the packlands stood exactly as Karen remembered, iron and oak, carved with symbols of strength and legacy. The same guards flanked the entrance, though their faces had aged, grown harder. They didn't recognize her. Karen stood at the forest's edge, Daniel Woods a silent shadow at her back. Between them, holding each of her hands, stood Freddie and Kimberly. 3 years old. Impossibly beautiful. Terrifyingly powerful. Freddie watched the guards with his father's eyes, pale gold, assessing, missing nothing. He stood unnaturally still for a child his age, his small hand warm and steady in hers. Kimberly hummed softly under her breath, a melody that made the air vibrate strangely. Her dark hair caught the afternoon light, and when she glanced up at Karen, her smile was pure innocence. But Karen had learned better than to mistake her daughter for harmless. "Mama," Freddie said quietly, "they're afraid." "Not of us," Karen replied. "They don't know who we are yet. Should I tell them?" Kimberly asked, her voice sweet as honey. "No, baby. Not yet." Daniel Woods shifted behind them, his presence radiating outward like heat from a fire. The guard stiffened, hands moving instinctively toward weapons they wouldn't have time to draw. "State your business," the taller guard called out, his voice tight with poorly concealed nervousness. Karen stepped forward into full view. She wore simple traveling clothes, leather and wool, nothing ceremonial. Her hair hung loose down her back, threaded with silver beads the twins had insisted on weaving in that morning. 3 years of wilderness had carved away softness, left behind something leaner, harder. She looked nothing like the broken Luna who'd fled into exile, and everything like something far more dangerous. "I'm here to see the Alpha," Karen said calmly. The guards exchanged glances. "The Alpha doesn't grant audiences to. Tell Kenneth Lugo that Karen Vox has returned." Both guards went rigid. The shorter one actually took a step back. That's not possible," he stammered. "Karen Vox was exiled. She's standing right here," Karen finished, "with a message the Alpha will want to hear. We can't just—" Freddie released Karen's hand and walked forward 3 paces. Just 3. But something in the way he moved made both guards freeze. The boy tilted his head, studying them with an expression far too ancient for his small face. "You will announce us," Freddie said softly.
Now.
It wasn't a command. It wasn't a threat. It was simply stated fact. And somehow, that made it impossible to resist. The taller guard swallowed hard. I'll send word to the Alpha's hall." "Do that," Karen said. She watched him stumble through the gates, practically running. The remaining guard kept his distance, his eyes darting between Karen, the children, and the massive shadow that was Daniel Woods. "What is that thing?" he whispered, unable to help himself. "Protection," Karen replied simply. Kimberly giggled, a bright, childish sound completely at odds with the tension crackling through the air. "He's pretty," she announced, pointing at the guard. "Don't you think he's pretty, Mama?" "Very pretty, sweetheart." The guard's face flushed crimson. Within minutes, movement erupted beyond the gates. Voices raised in shock and confusion. Karen caught fragments. "Can't be her. Thought she was dead. What is she doing with children?" Then a familiar voice cut through the chaos, sharp with authority. "Let them through."
Kenneth.
The gates groaned open. Karen's heart should have raced. Should have stumbled. Should have felt something at the sound of his voice after 3 years of silence. Instead, she felt only cold clarity. She gathered her children close, felt Daniel Woods fall into step behind her, and walked through the gates she'd once believed she'd never see again. The pack had gathered. Of course they had. News traveled fast in closed territories. Wolves lined the path to the Alpha's hall, their faces a mixture of shock, curiosity, and poorly concealed hostility. Karen recognized many of them. Former allies. Former friends. People who'd watched her exile in silence. None of them mattered now. Only the man waiting at the top of the stone steps mattered. Kenneth Lugo stood exactly where she'd left him, elevated, commanding, draped in the symbols of his authority. Cynthia Clot hovered at his right hand, her face carefully composed but her eyes sharp with calculation. William's Bob flanked his left, his expression unreadable. But Kenneth stared at Karen like he was seeing a ghost. His gaze dropped to the children, to Freddie's pale gold eyes, to Kimberly's familiar features. And for the first time in 3 years, Karen Vox saw Kenneth Lugo's composure crack. "Hello, Kenneth," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the sudden, absolute silence. "We need to talk." Chapter 5. The Confrontation. The Alpha's hall felt smaller than Karen remembered. Or perhaps she had simply grown larger, not in body, but in presence. 3 years of survival had a way of expanding a person beyond their former boundaries. Kenneth descended the steps slowly, his face a carefully constructed mask. But Karen could see the cracks forming, the slight tremor in his jaw, the way his eyes kept darting back to the children.
To his children.
"This is quite the entrance," Kenneth said, his voice measured. "After 3 years of silence, you return with what, exactly? A performance. A reckoning," Karen replied evenly. Cynthia's hand drifted to Kenneth's arm, possessive, territorial. The gesture didn't escape Karen's notice. Neither did the way Cynthia's fingers trembled slightly.
"Good.
Let her be afraid. These children," Kenneth began, "are yours." Karen finished. "Freddie and Kimberly. Your son and daughter. Born 8 months after you cast me out for being barren." The hall erupted in whispers. Kenneth's hand shot up, demanding silence. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "The healers confirmed. The healers were wrong." Karen's voice cut through the air like a blade. Or perhaps they were simply premature in their judgment. "As were you." William's Bob stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. "You expect us to believe that you miraculously conceived after 3 years of failure, only to conveniently discover it after being exiled?" "I expect nothing," Karen said coldly. "I'm simply stating facts. What you choose to believe is irrelevant." "Then why return?" Kenneth demanded. "If you've survived these 3 years in the wilderness, why come back now?" Karen smiled, a sharp, dangerous thing. "Because they asked about their father. And I decided it was time they met the man who rejected them before they even existed." Freddie stepped forward, his small hand slipping from Karen's. He moved with eerie confidence, stopping at the base of the steps directly before Kenneth. "You're the Alpha," the boy said. Not a question. A statement. Kenneth stared down at him, and Karen watched something like recognition flicker across his face. Those eyes.
That jawline.
The way Freddie stood, spine straight, chin lifted, like looking into a mirror cast backward through time. "Yes," Kenneth said slowly. "I am. Mama says you didn't want us." The hall went deathly quiet. Kenneth's throat worked. "I didn't know you existed. Would it have mattered?" Freddie tilted his head, the gesture disturbingly adult. "If you'd known," Kenneth opened his mouth, closed it. For once in his life, the Alpha had no answer. Kimberly drifted forward to stand beside her brother, her small hand finding his. She studied Kenneth with those dark, knowing eyes. "You hurt Mama," she said softly. "Kimberly," Karen warned, but her daughter continued. "You made her cry. You sent her away. You said she was broken." Each word landed like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples through the assembled pack. "But Mama isn't broken," Kimberly continued, her voice taking on that strange resonance that made the air shimmer. You are. Kenneth flinched as if struck. Cynthia moved forward, her composure finally cracking. How dare you let a child speak to the Alpha this way? Kenneth, are you going to allow? Quiet. The single word from Kenneth silenced her instantly. His eyes never left the twins. They're mine, he said, the words barely above a whisper. Aren't they? Did you doubt it?
Karen asked.
I don't know what to believe anymore. Then let me make it simple. Karen moved forward, placing herself between Kenneth and her children. Instinct, protection, power. I didn't return seeking your approval or your acceptance. I returned because my children deserve to know their heritage, to understand where they came from. And then what? Kenneth demanded, something like desperation creeping into his voice. You'll leave again? Take them back to whatever wilderness you've been hiding in? That depends entirely on you. On me. On whether you can acknowledge what you threw away. Karen's voice dropped, became deadly soft. On whether you're capable of admitting you were wrong. The hall held its breath. Kenneth stared at her. At this woman who looked like his former mate, but stood like a queen. At the children who carried his blood, but answered only to her. At the impossible situation he'd created with his own pride. William's Bob cleared his throat. Alpha, perhaps we should discuss this privately. No, Kenneth said. She returned publicly. This will be addressed publicly. He descended the final steps, bringing himself level with Karen. You want acknowledgement? He asked. You want me to admit I was wrong? I want nothing from you. Karen said. But they deserve better than your silence. Kenneth looked at Freddie, at Kimberly, at the future he'd rejected before it even had a chance to exist. You're right, he said finally. I was wrong. Chapter 6, the word. Kenneth's admission hung in the air like smoke after lightning. I was wrong. The pack remained frozen, uncertain how to process their Alpha's public vulnerability. Karen watched Kenneth's face, searching for sincerity behind the words, but years of his calculated performances had taught her to trust nothing he said without proof. Wrong about what exactly? She asked, her voice steady. Wrong to reject me? Wrong to exile a loyal mate? Or simply wrong to get caught? Kenneth's jaw tightened. All of it. I was. You were protecting your legacy, William's Bob interrupted, stepping forward with the audacity of someone who'd enabled every cruel decision. The pack needed strength. Certainty. You did what any Alpha would. Enough. The word came from Freddie. Not shouted. Not commanded. Simply stated with a finality that made William's Bob's mouth snap shut mid-sentence. The boy walked forward, his small frame somehow dominating the space between Kenneth and the assembled court. He stopped directly in front of William's Bob, tilting his head back to meet the elder's eyes. You advised him, Freddie said quietly. You told him to send Mama away. William's Bob's face paled. The situation required difficult choices. You chose wrong. The words carried weight that had nothing to do with volume. Wolves throughout the hall shifted uncomfortably, instinct recognizing something their minds couldn't quite process. This child, this 3-year-old, radiated authority that made experienced warriors nervous. Cynthia laughed, a brittle, desperate sound. This is absurd. We're listening to children now? Kenneth, surely you can't. You've been waiting for this moment, haven't you? Karen cut in, her gaze fixed on the other woman. 3 years of standing in my place. Playing Luna. Believing you'd won. Cynthia's composure cracked further. I earned my position. I gave Kenneth what you couldn't. Heirs. Karen smiled coldly. How many children do you have, Cynthia? The question landed like a slap. Cynthia's face flushed crimson. That's not, we haven't. 3 years, Karen pressed. And still nothing. Almost like barrenness isn't quite as simple as the healers claimed. Kenneth's head snapped toward Cynthia, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. You told me. I told you nothing but the truth. Cynthia's voice rose, defensive. She was examined. She was declared. Convenient, Karen said softly. That declaration. Right when you needed to replace me. The implications rippled through the hall. Wolves exchanged glances. William's Bob took a careful step backward. Kenneth's expression darkened. Cynthia, did you influence the healer's assessment? I did what was necessary for the pack. Cynthia's mask shattered completely. You were wasting away with her, obsessing over an empty womb while enemies circled. I gave you clarity.
Purpose.
I gave you lies. Kimberly's voice cut through Cynthia's tirade like a knife through silk. The little girl had been silent until now, content to let her brother and mother handle the confrontation. But something in Cynthia's desperate justifications had drawn her forward. She walked with deliberate slowness, her small feet silent on the marble floor. The pack parted before her without conscious thought, instinct driving them away from whatever they sensed approaching. Kimberly stopped before Cynthia, her dark eyes impossibly ancient. You lie, the child said softly. You've always lied. I don't have to listen to this, Cynthia hissed, but she didn't move. Couldn't move. You poisoned the healer's minds. You whispered doubts to the elders. You made Mama seem broken so you could take her place. Each word fell with terrible precision. You thought you were clever. Thought no one would ever know. Kimberly's voice began to resonate, that same strange vibration that made reality feel thin. But I know. I see. And you will. Kimberly, Karen warned. The little girl glanced back at her mother, and for just a moment, she was simply a child again, small, uncertain, seeking guidance. Karen shook her head slightly. Not like this. Not with cruelty. Kimberly turned back to Cynthia, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost its otherworldly edge. Kneel. One word. Simple.
Clear.
Absolute. Cynthia's legs buckled instantly. She crashed to her knees with a cry of shock and rage, her body obeying a command her mind couldn't resist. The hall erupted in chaos. Wolves shouted in alarm. Guards moved forward, then froze, uncertain whether this was an attack or something else entirely. Kenneth stared at his daughter, with an expression caught between awe and terror. William's Bob stumbled backward, his face ashen. And Karen simply watched as her 3-year-old daughter commanded the court with a single word, her small face serene, her power undeniable. Daniel Woods materialized from the shadows behind them, his presence suddenly tangible, overwhelming. The message was clear. The rejected Luna had returned, and she had brought judgment with her. Chapter 7. The New Order. Cynthia remained on her knees, trembling with rage and humiliation. Around her, the pack watched in stunned silence as everything they believed for 3 years crumbled like sand. Kenneth stood frozen, his carefully constructed world fracturing before his eyes. Karen let the moment stretch. Let them all feel the weight of what had just happened. Let them understand that power didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered through the voice of a child. Finally, she spoke. Stand up, Cynthia. Kimberly glanced at her mother, then nodded slightly. The invisible pressure released. Cynthia scrambled to her feet, her face blotchy with tears and fury. You can't. What is she? My daughter, Karen said simply. What did you expect when you drove me into the wilderness? That I'd simply disappear? That exile would break me? She moved forward, commanding the space without effort. You wanted me gone because I threatened your ambitions. You manipulated healers, poisoned minds, whispered lies. All so you could stand where I once stood. Karen's gaze swept the assembled court. But here's what you never understood. Being Luna isn't about proximity to power. It's about being powerful enough that power recognizes you. William's Bob found his voice, though it shook. Alpha, we need to discuss what these children just demonstrated. That kind of ability is none of your concern. Daniel Wood spoke for the first time. His voice rolled through the hall like distant thunder. Every wolf present felt it in their bones, ancient, absolute other. He stepped fully into view, no longer content to lurk in shadows. The court recoiled instinctively. What are you? William's Bob whispered. Bound to the bloodline, Daniel replied. Owed to the line. Here to protect what you tried to destroy. Kenneth finally found his voice. The children. They're not just there more than. They're everything you rejected, Karen finished. Your legacy. Your heirs. Your future. And you threw them away before they even drew breath. She let that settle, watched him absorb the magnitude of his mistake. So now we establish new terms, Karen continued. I didn't return to beg for my place back. I returned to ensure my children know their heritage, to make certain they understand exactly what blood runs through their veins. And what do you want? Kenneth asked, his alpha's pride warring with something that looked suspiciously like regret. Acknowledgement.
Public.
Complete. Karen's voice hardened. You will tell this pack that Freddie and Kimberly are your legitimate heirs. You will ensure their names are recorded in pack history. You will guarantee their inheritance. And you? Kenneth pressed. What about us? Karen studied the man she'd once loved. The mate who'd severed their bond without hesitation. The alpha who'd chosen politics over partnership. There is no us, she said quietly. That died 3 years ago when you decided I wasn't worth fighting for. Something flickered across Kenneth's face. Pain, perhaps, or the ghost of what they'd lost. But my children deserve better than your mistakes, Karen continued. So you will be their father. You will teach them, guide them, prepare them for whatever future awaits. And you will do it without attempting to control me. Those are your terms? Those are my terms. Kenneth looked at Freddie, at Kimberly, at the impossible gifts he'd nearly lost forever. And if I refuse? Freddie smiled, a small, knowing expression far too calculated for his age. You won't, the boy said simply, because they all knew the truth now. These children weren't just heirs. They were something unprecedented, something powerful enough to reshape pack hierarchy with a word. Kenneth had already lost one war through pride. He wasn't foolish enough to start another. Williams, Kenneth said, his voice heavy with resignation. Prepare a formal proclamation. Freddie Chapman and Kimberly Christ are to be recognized as my legitimate heirs, with all rights and privileges that entails. Williams Bob opened his mouth, probably to protest, then caught sight of Daniel Wood's impassive face and thought better of it. Yes, Alpha, he muttered. Kenneth turned back to Karen. And Cynthia? Karen glanced at the woman who'd orchestrated her downfall. Cynthia stood rigid, her earlier arrogance completely extinguished. Is no longer your concern, Karen said. She manipulated you both. Whatever arrangement you had dies today. For once, Cynthia didn't argue. She simply fled. Out of the hall, out of the court, out of the story entirely. Kenneth watched her go, then sighed. You've changed. I survived, Karen corrected. There's a difference. She gathered her children close, felt Daniel Wood settle into position behind her. Guardian, protector, proof that she'd never truly been alone. We'll stay until proper arrangements are made, Karen said. Then we return to the wilderness. You're not staying? Kenneth asked, something like desperation creeping in. Karen smiled, gentle this time, almost sad. The pack rejected me, Kenneth. I've built a different life now. One where my worth isn't measured by what I can provide others. She turned toward the doors, her children flanking her, her guardian shadowing her steps. But they'll visit, she added softly, because every child deserves to know where they come from. Even if they choose not to stay, Freddie finished. Kenneth watched them leave, his former mate, his impossible children, his greatest mistake walking away. This time he didn't try to stop them. Chapter 8. The Bond. 3 weeks. That's how long the proper arrangements took. 3 weeks of tense negotiations, formal proclamations, and carefully orchestrated public ceremonies. 3 weeks of watching Kenneth struggle to balance his pride with his newfound desire to know his children. 3 weeks of the pack adjusting to a reality they'd never imagined. Karen stood in the guest quarters, luxurious rooms that felt nothing like home, watching Freddie and Kimberly play with wooden wolves Kenneth had carved himself. A peace offering, an attempt at connection. The children accepted them with polite distance, the way one might accept a gift from a stranger. Because that's what Kenneth was to them. A stranger who happened to share their blood. He tries very hard, Freddie observed, arranging the carved wolves in formation. But he doesn't know how. How to what, sweetheart? How to be a father? He only knows how to be an alpha. Karen's chest tightened. Her son was 3 years old and already understood what had taken her years to realize. Kimberly hummed as she played, that strange resonance underlying her melody.
He's sad, Mama.
Inside, where he thinks no one can see. People make choices, Karen said carefully. Sometimes they regret those choices. But regret doesn't erase what was done. Do you still love him? Kimberly asked, her dark eyes too knowing. Karen considered lying. Considered offering the simple answer children might need. But her children weren't simple. I love who he was, she said finally. Before fear made him cruel. Before ambition made him careless. But that person died 3 years ago in the judgment hall. And the new person? Freddie pressed. Is someone I'm still learning to understand. A knock interrupted them. Daniel Woods materialized from the shadows near the window. He'd taken to doing that, appearing and disappearing like smoke. The Alpha requests an audience, he rumbled. Private.
Just you.
Karen's stomach clenched. The children. Will be safe with me. Always. She believed him. In 3 years, Daniel Woods had never once failed them. Tell him I'll meet him in the garden. Neutral ground. Kenneth waited beneath the ancient oak where they'd first declared their mate bond 6 years ago. The symbolism wasn't lost on Karen. He looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than missed sleep. Thank you for coming, he said as she approached. You're their father. I won't avoid you. But you'd prefer to. Yes. The honesty seemed to strike him harder than any accusation. He absorbed it in silence, then gestured to the stone bench beneath the tree. Karen remained standing. Kenneth sighed. The proclamation is complete. The pack has accepted Freddie and Kimberly as my heirs. Williams has been encouraged to support this publicly. Good. The elders want to discuss their training, their education, how to properly prepare them for.
No.
Kenneth blinked.
No.
They're 3 years old, Kenneth. They're not political pieces to be molded and positioned. They're heirs to an alpha bloodline. They need to understand. They understand more than you ever will, Karen cut in. They don't need your elders filling their heads with pack politics and hierarchy games. They need to be children. In the wilderness? Kenneth's frustration leaked through. Karen, they deserve stability, structure, a real home. They have a home. In exile? Hiding with some ancient creature we don't understand, eating whatever you can hunt, sleeping under trees? His voice rose. That's not a life for them. That's not what you would choose, Karen finished coldly. But it's not your choice to make. Kenneth ran a hand through his hair, the gesture achingly familiar. I'm trying, Karen. I'm trying to do better. To be better. But you won't even give me a chance to. To what? Win me back. Karen laughed, the sound sharp. Kenneth, you don't understand. This isn't about forgiveness. This isn't about second chances or redemption arcs. This is about the fact that I don't need you anymore. The words hung between them like a blade. I did once, Karen continued, her voice softer now. I needed you so desperately that your rejection nearly destroyed me. But the wilderness taught me something you never could. What's that? That I was never weak. I was just loving someone who made me believe I was. Kenneth flinched as if struck. The children will visit, Karen said. They'll learn about the pack, about their heritage, about you. But they're coming home with me. To the place where we're wanted. Where we're safe. Where no one questions our worth. And us. Kenneth asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Is there any possibility of us? Karen looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw the regret, the longing, the desperate hope of a man who'd realized too late what he'd lost. And felt nothing.
No anger.
No love. No pain. Just the quiet certainty of a door that had closed and locked 3 years ago. No, she said gently. There's not. She turned to leave, then paused. But Kenneth? Be the father they deserve. That's all I ask." She walked away from the oak tree, from the ghost of their bond, from the man who'd once been everything, and felt lighter with every step. Chapter 9. The Departure. Dawn broke over the Packlands with quiet finality. Karen stood at the gates, the same gates she'd passed through 3 weeks ago, watching her children say goodbye to the father they barely knew. Kenneth knelt before them, eye level, his composure finally stripped away.
No alpha mask.
No political calculation. Just a man facing the consequence of choices made in fear. "You'll come back?" he asked, and Karen heard the plea beneath the question. "Every full moon," Freddie promised. "Mama said so." "And you'll write? Tell me about your lives?" Kimberly tilted her head, considering. Then she stepped forward and placed her small hand on Kenneth's cheek, a gesture of comfort so pure it made Karen's throat tighten. "You're going to be okay," the little girl said softly. "It hurts now, but you'll learn." Kenneth's eyes glistened. "Learn what?" "That love isn't about holding on. It's about being brave enough to let go." 3 years old, and already wiser than most wolves would ever be. Kenneth pulled both children into an embrace, careful, tentative, as if afraid they might disappear. Freddie allowed it with patient tolerance. Kimberly hummed that strange melody that made the air feel warmer. When Kenneth finally released them, he stood and faced Karen. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not taking them from me completely. They're not weapons, Kenneth. They're children. They deserve to know both sides of their story. Even the ugly parts. Especially those. How else will they learn what not to become?" Kenneth absorbed that, then extended something wrapped in dark cloth. "For you. Before you go." Karen hesitated, then accepted. She unwrapped it carefully. Her Luna pendant, the silver wolf she'd worn for 3 years, removed the morning of her exile. "I kept it," Kenneth said quietly. "Couldn't bring myself to give it to anyone else. It felt wrong." Karen studied the pendant, feeling nothing but distant memory. This symbol had once meant everything. Now it was just metal-shaped like meaning. "Keep it," she said, handing it back. "Give it to someone worthy. Someone who'll fight for their place instead of waiting to be told they deserve it. You are worthy." "I know." Karen smiled, sad, certain, free. "That's why I don't need it anymore." She turned to find Daniel Woods waiting, patient as stone. Freddie and Kimberly had already joined him, each taking one of his massive hands without fear. The pack had gathered to watch. Some faces held respect, others confusion. A few showed barely concealed relief. William's Bob stood near the back, diminished and silent. Cynthia was nowhere to be seen. Rumor said she'd left for another territory, her ambitions shattered beyond repair. "Ready?" Karen asked her children. "Ready," they chorused. She looked back one final time. At the hall where she'd been judged. At the gates that had closed behind her in shame. At the man who'd learned too late what he'd destroyed. "Goodbye, Kenneth." "This isn't goodbye," he said desperately. "You'll return. Every full moon, you said." "They'll return," Karen corrected gently. "I'll bring them. But for me, this is closure." She walked through the gates with her head high, her children flanking her, her guardian shadowing her steps. The wilderness opened before them. Vast, untamed, home. Behind them, the Packlands grew smaller. And Kenneth Lugo stood alone at the gates, watching his greatest mistake walk away for the second and final time. 1 year later, the rumor spread like wildfire through the territories. "Have you heard about the Luna in the wilderness? The one with the impossible twins? The one protected by something ancient and unkillable? The one who rejected an Alpha's desperate attempts at reconciliation?" Packs from distant territories sent emissaries, seeking audience. Some wanted to study the children. Others hoped to forge alliances. A few brave souls asked if Karen would consider accepting a new mate bond. She declined them all with polite finality. Her life had become something she'd never imagined in those dark early days of exile. She'd built a home, not grand, but sufficient. She'd established connections with rogues and outcasts, forming a loose network of wolves who'd been rejected by traditional packs. She'd created her own pack, in a way. One built on choice rather than hierarchy. Freddie and Kimberly thrived. They visited Kenneth monthly as promised, and he tried, genuinely tried, to be present for them. But they always returned to the wilderness with visible relief, eager to be home. Daniel Woods remained ever present, ever vigilant. He'd become as much family as guardian, his ancient presence a constant reassurance. And Karen? Karen had discovered something she'd lost the day she became Luna. Herself. Not someone's mate. Not someone's disappointment. Not someone's rejected failure. Just Karen Vox.
Whole. Complete. Free.
She stood at the edge of her territory one evening, watching the sun set through ancient trees, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years.
Peace.
Behind her, laughter echoed as Freddie and Kimberly played. Beside her, Daniel Woods kept his eternal watch. And for the first time in her life, Karen understood a fundamental truth. The greatest revenge wasn't making those who'd hurt you regret their choices. It was building a life so fulfilling that their regret became irrelevant. Kenneth could keep his throne, his pack, his carefully constructed legacy. Karen had something far more valuable. She had herself, and that was worth more than any crown. Epilogue. The legacy. 5 years after the rejection, Kenneth Lugo stood in his private study, reading the latest report from his scouts. The Wilderness Pack, they called it now. Karen's informal network of outcasts and rogues had grown into something resembling a legitimate territory. Not bound by traditional hierarchy, not governed by alpha law, but powerful nonetheless. And at its center, his children. Freddie, now 8 years old, had developed abilities that made seasoned warriors nervous. The boy could command obedience with a glance, could sense deception like others sense scent. He moved through the wilderness with the confidence of someone who'd never known doubt. Kimberly had grown into her voice. When she spoke, really spoke, with that resonance that bent reality, wolves from miles away felt compelled to listen. She'd used it only twice in the past 5 years, both times to stop conflicts before they escalated to bloodshed. Karen had taught them restraint, power tempered by wisdom, strength balanced by compassion. Everything Kenneth had failed to teach them in his brief, clumsy attempts at fatherhood. He saw them monthly. They were polite, affectionate even. But he could feel the distance that would never close. He was their father in biology, only. Daniel Woods was their true guardian. Karen was their true parent. Kenneth had relegated himself to occasional visitor in their extraordinary lives. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. William's Bob shuffled in, looking older than his years. The elder had never recovered from the humiliation of that day. His influence had withered, his voice in council matters now barely a whisper. The pack requests an update, Alpha. The annual review of heirs and succession. Tell them my heirs are thriving, Kenneth said flatly. Beyond our reach, but thriving. Some have suggested alternative arrangements. Your bloodline through another.
No.
The word carried finality. Kenneth had tried once to consider taking another mate, had even allowed the pack to arrange introductions. But every woman paled in comparison to the ghost of what he'd lost. Not Karen as she'd been, fragile, accommodating, desperate for his approval. Karen as she'd become, powerful, independent, unbreakable. That was what haunted him. Will there be anything else, Alpha? Kenneth waved dismissal. When Williams left, he returned to the reports. Karen's territory had successfully mediated 3 disputes between neighboring packs. Her reputation for fairness had spread. Wolves sought her counsel. Some even requested to join her unconventional pack. She'd built an empire of the rejected, and it flourished. His desk held a letter from Freddie, neat handwriting describing a hunting expedition, a new tracking technique he'd learned, excitement about an upcoming visit. Beside it, a drawing from Kimberly, wolves and trees and stars, with 4 figures at the center, herself, Freddie, their mother, and Daniel Woods. No space for Kenneth in that family portrait. He was their father. their blood, their history. But he wasn't their home. Kenneth carefully filed both items in the locked drawer where he kept every letter, every drawing, every scrap of connection to the children he'd rejected before they even existed. His legacy, his greatest achievement, and his deepest regret, bound together inextricably. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd rejected Karen for being barren, for threatening his bloodline's future. And in doing so, he created the most powerful heirs his lineage had ever known, then lost them to the wilderness he'd condemned their mother to. History would remember him as the Alpha whose children reshaped pack culture from outside traditional boundaries. History would remember Karen as the Luna who proved that rejection couldn't destroy what was truly powerful. And history would remember that moment in the Great Hall when a 3-year-old child spoke one word that changed everything.
Kneel.
Kenneth looked out his window toward the wilderness, toward the life he'd never be part of, the family he'd forfeited, the woman who'd become someone magnificent the moment she stopped being his. Somewhere out there, Karen Vox was teaching their children to be extraordinary. And he was here, alone, ruling an empire that suddenly felt very small. "I was wrong," he whispered to the empty room. No one answered. No one ever would. End of epilogue. If this story moved you, if Karen's journey inspired you, if you want more powerful tales of rejection, resilience, and revenge, subscribe to Megan Romance audiobooks right now. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications, because we're just getting started. More rejected Lunas, more impossible twins, more ancient beings, and devastating one-word moments that will leave you speechless. And drop a comment below. What country are you watching from? Let's build a global pack of romance lovers who know that the best revenge is becoming unforgettable. See you in the next story.